My name is Caroline Brooks. I'm 43 years old, a retired Brigadier General in the United States Air Force. I've served my country for over 2 decades, worn the uniform longer than I've done anything else in life. I've stood in deserts where the wind cut through your bones. I've flown missions that never made the news. I've held the hands of soldiers as they took their last breaths. But none of that prepared me for the text message I received from my own family 5 minutes before boarding a flight I had paid for. The message read, "No place. Don't come back. No punctuation. No explanation." Just 7 words that cracked something inside me that I didn't even realize was still breakable. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply box. For a split second, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they meant something else. But deep down, I knew better. I always knew better. I typed back 2 words. Understood. Good luck. And that was it. I looked around the terminal. Families laughed, couples bickered over carry-ons, children clutched stuffed animals. Life was moving on as it always does, indifferent to the small collapses happening quietly in someone's chest. I thought I had grown immune to this, to the way they always found new methods to remind me that no matter what I achieved, I would never belong, never be one of them. I was the daughter who didn't marry, didn't have children, the one who came home wearing a uniform they couldn't understand. But even then, even after all these years, I had hoped this trip would be different. It wasn't. I exhaled slowly, tucked the phone back into my coat pocket, and straightened my shoulders. People always talk about how military service hardens you, how it makes you cold. That's not true. What hardens you is betrayal. I made my way to the gate without hesitation. My boarding pass still valid because I was the one who booked every single ticket for this family trip to Charleston. The irony wasn't lost on me. They accepted the destination, the hotel, the first-class seats, but not me. As I stepped onto the jet bridge, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. An aging woman with sharp eyes, a calm expression, and something fragile trembling beneath the surface. It reminded me of my mother's words, once hissed in the kitchen when she thought I wasn't listening. She's not like us. She never was. The door to the aircraft loomed ahead. I could have turned back, but I didn't. I boarded the plane because some battles aren't fought on battlefields. They're fought inside the quiet refusal to be erased. I took my seat in 12A, window. I always chose window seats. I didn't want to see who passed me by. It was 5 minutes later that everything began to shift. That's when the pilot stopped the entire flight. That's when he stepped out from the cockpit, looked me straight in the eye, and saluted. "Ma'am, General, please come up." The cabin went silent. My family 3 rows ahead turned as one, their faces drained of color, shocked, speechless. I didn't move right away. I just sat there letting the weight of the moment settle. I thought, this is what justice feels like. I'm telling you this story not because I need pity. I'm telling you because sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones you keep forgiving until you finally stop. And when that day comes, you don't need to raise your voice. You just need to rise. I stepped onto the plane without looking back. My boarding pass trembled slightly between my fingers, but my steps were steady. Years of military discipline taught me that the world doesn't stop spinning just because your heart cracks open. The cabin smelled like stale coffee and recycled air, the familiar scent of every flight I'd ever taken. I greeted the flight attendant with a polite nod. She smiled mechanically, eyes already scanning the next passenger. I found my seat 12A window as always. I placed my small carry-on beneath the seat in front of me, sat down slowly, and exhaled. My hands rested on my lap, the veins beneath my skin more visible these days. Outside the window, the tarmac gleamed under the harsh morning sun. Planes taxied in the distance. It could have been any airport, any city, but somehow this moment felt different, heavier. I let my head rest against the seat back. And before I could stop it, my mind took me back to another departure, one I hadn't thought about in years. I was 18 the first time I left home. It was raining that morning, the kind of cold, relentless rain that seeps into your bones. I remember standing in the kitchen, hands clenched at my sides, while my mother hurled words sharp enough to draw blood. "You're throwing your life away," she spat. "You think wearing a uniform will make you matter? It won't. You'll come back broken, or worse." I remember the smell of burned toast, the chipped edge of the counter where I gripped so hard my knuckles turned white. And the look on my father's face blank distant, like he wasn't even in the room. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just picked up my duffel bag, straightened my spine, and walked out the door. No hugs, no goodbye. Just the sound of the screen door slamming shut behind me. That was the first time I learned sometimes you have to leave people behind not because you want to, but because staying will kill something inside you. The memory faded as the current moment pulled me back. A family across the aisle laughed softly. A toddler clutched a stuffed bear swinging his legs, unaware of the quiet wars happening in the hearts of grown-ups. The ordinariness of it all, how life moves on regardless, felt almost cruel. I adjusted the lap belt, the metal buckle cold against my palm. The seat beside me remained empty for now. That small detail brought a strange comfort. For a few minutes at least, I could be alone with the quiet. I caught my reflection faintly in the window glass. The years showed in the lines around my eyes, the silver strands in my hair. I didn't look like the girl from that rainy kitchen. But somewhere deep beneath the uniform, beneath the medals, I still carried her, the girl who wanted so badly to be enough. The boarding continued. Passengers shuffled in, overhead bins clicked shut. I stayed silent, watching the clouds gathering on the horizon beyond the runway. And in that moment, as the final passengers settled into their seats, I realized something simple but profound sometimes. The deepest betrayals don't happen in battlefields or boardrooms. They happen in living rooms, in text messages, in the quiet way people who should love you simply don't. I kept my eyes on the window. The engines hummed softly beneath my feet. I breathed in, I breathed out, and I waited. I suppose the first time I realized I was the outsider in my own family, I was about 7 years old. My brother Ethan had just won his school's science fair. It wasn't anything monumental, a model volcano that barely sputtered smoke, but you would have thought he discovered the cure for cancer. My parents threw a small celebration that night. Balloons, cake. My mother even pulled out the good china, the one she reserved for special occasions. I remember standing by the doorway watching them laugh, as Ethan held his flimsy blue ribbon in the air, basking in the glow of their attention. No one noticed I was missing from the pictures. No one asked why I sat alone on the back porch picking at the frayed hem of my jeans. I was invisible even then. Growing up, Ethan could do no wrong. He was the golden child, the charming, easygoing boy who brought home decent grades, played sports, and cracked jokes at the dinner table. I was the other one, the quiet one, the too serious child who read too much, asked too many questions, and always seemed out of step. My mother used to say it half jokingly to her friends. Caroline's always been different. That word wrapped around my neck like a chain. It followed me through every report card, every family gathering, every holiday where my accomplishments, no matter how hard won, were met with polite nods, while Ethan's smallest victories were celebrated like miracles. The worst part wasn't the obvious favoritism. It was the subtle things. The way my father would pat Ethan's shoulder and say, "That's my boy," but never quite knew how to touch me. The way my mother's voice always softened when she spoke to him, but carried a sharpness whenever she called my name. I learned early how to shrink myself, how to disappear in a room without leaving, how to swallow my words because I knew they wouldn't be heard. That's probably why the military felt like salvation to me. It wasn't about rebellion. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about finding a place, any place where my worth wasn't measured by the standards of a family that never really saw me. I remember the day I got my acceptance letter to the Air Force Academy. I'd left it on the kitchen counter for them to find. No one said a word. My mother folded it neatly and placed it under the newspaper like it was nothing more than junk mail. I left home 3 weeks later. I didn't cry. I didn't say goodbye. I packed my bags, straightened my back, and walked out the door. And I think, deep down, I knew I was never coming back. Back in the present, seated on that airplane, I could still hear the echoes of that silence, the way some absences make more noise than any words ever could. I closed my eyes briefly, grounding myself in the hum of the engines. But the memories clung unshakable. Some ghosts follow you everywhere. The truth is, I didn't choose the military out of some noble sense of patriotism. At least not at first. I chose it because I was running from the suffocating quiet of that house, from the way my mother's eyes never quite met mine, from the unbearable smallness of being unwanted. I needed distance, space, a new identity that wasn't carved by their disappointment. I still remember the first time I touched the cool fabric of my uniform, the weight of the insignia, the sharp crease of the sleeves. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere, like there was a version of me that mattered. The Air Force didn't ask about the family I left behind. It didn't care that no one came to my commissioning ceremony. It only asked one question: could I do the job? And I could. God, I could. I threw myself into every task, every assignment, every deployment. I climbed ranks because I had to, because failure would mean going back, and I knew there was nothing for me back there. Somewhere along the way, I met James. He was everything I wasn't. Warm, open, a smile that could disarm even the most guarded hearts. We met in Kandahar over stale coffee and shared exhaustion. He called me Brooks even when he didn't have to. I called him Trouble even though I knew he wasn't. I wasn't looking for anything. I had built walls around my heart so thick I didn't think anyone could find their way through. But he did. We talked about simple things, books, music, what we'd do when we got out. He wanted to open a small bakery in Vermont, said he had no idea how to bake, but figured he'd learn. I let myself believe just for a little while that maybe I could have that kind of life too. And then, one morning the call came. I wasn't there. I wasn't on that convoy. But James was. Roadside bomb. Instant. No survivors. I remember standing in the dusty courtyard when they told me. The world around me stayed the same, soldiers moving, helicopters buzzing. But something inside me fractured so quietly I don't think anyone noticed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just folded the letter they handed me and walked back to my tent. From that day forward, I stopped letting people in. Because loving meant losing. And I'd already lost more than most. I buried myself in duty, in medals and missions and miles. I became the version of myself that no longer hoped for home, no longer expected softness, only precision, only control. And sitting here on this plane decades later, I realized that part of me never really came back from Afghanistan. Some wounds don't leave scars you can see. They live in the way you stop reaching for others, in the way you brace for impact even when no danger is near. I adjusted my seatbelt and kept my eyes on the window, the sky outside turning a muted gray. I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet. The sound of the boarding door clicking shut pulled me back to the present. I sat still in seat 12A, hands folded neatly on my lap, eyes fixed on the tarmac outside. The engines hummed low beneath my feet, steady and familiar, but something in the air felt off, thick with tension I couldn't quite place. That's when I saw her. The flight attendant. She was young, early 30s, maybe perfectly polished in her navy uniform tablet, tucked tightly against her chest. She approached my row with that professional smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said gently. "Are you Caroline Brooks?" I nodded once. "Yes." She shifted her weight uncomfortably. "I'm very sorry, but there's been a request. We have a family further up who would like to sit together. They've asked if you could possibly switch seats so they can be accommodated." I blinked, the words slow to land. "I'm sorry." Which family? Her eyes darted briefly across the aisle, and then I saw it. Row 8, left side, my family. My mother sitting ramrod straight in her cream sweater, sunglasses, perched on her nose as if the cabin lighting was too harsh for her delicate sensibilities. My father beside her, half asleep, indifferent as ever. And my brother Ethan flanked by his wife and their 2 perfectly dressed children. None of them looked at me, not one. They kept their heads turned, eyes down, as if I wasn't even there. "They requested this?" I asked quietly. The attendant offered a weak smile. "Yes, ma'am. They said you're traveling together, but prefer to adjust seating for comfort." I almost laughed. Comfort. As if I was the discomfort they needed to remove. I could have said no. I could have pulled rank, not the military kind, but the human kind, the simple right to stay in the seat I paid for. But I didn't. Because something deeper than anger took hold in that moment. It wasn't rage. It wasn't humiliation. It was recognition. This was who they were. This was who they had always been. I unbuckled my seatbelt without a word. The flight attendant gestured toward the back of the plane, apologetic but distant. already moving on to her next task. As I stepped into the aisle, I caught a single glance from Ethan. Just a flicker of eye contact. His face was blank, no warmth, no guilt, no acknowledgement of what was happening. It was as if I were a stranger, a ghost passing through. I walked past them, each step measured, deliberate, ignoring the tightening in my chest, the old familiar ache of being unwanted. The farther I moved, the colder it felt. Passengers looked up briefly as I passed, but said nothing. A few offered polite nods, others barely registered my presence. I felt the weight of 100 silent judgments pressing down like hands on my shoulders. When I reached row 30, seat B, I sat down carefully. Middle seat. No legroom, no window, no dignity. I rested my hands on my knees, exhaled slowly, and kept my face neutral. This wasn't new. I had been erased before, and I knew some erasures don't happen all at once. They happen in quiet, deliberate moments until one day you realize you've been invisible for years. I kept my head down, but deep inside something shifted. Not broken, but sharpening. Sometimes the quietest humiliations are the ones that wake you up. I sat down in the cramped middle seat, the kind that makes you feel smaller the moment you lower yourself into it. The man on my left barely shifted to give me space. The teenager on my right kept his headphones on, oblivious. And somewhere ahead, rows and rows ahead, my family settled comfortably into the seats I had booked for them. None of them looked back. None of them hesitated, not even for a second. I closed my eyes for a moment, willing myself to breathe, to stay still, to stay silent. But memory has a way of breaking through no matter how tightly you try to seal it. It was 7 years ago, the last time I went back to that house. I had just returned from a tour in the Middle East. An IED had exploded near our convoy. I wasn't the worst injured, not by far. But my left knee shattered, splintered, never fully healed. Even now on this plane, it ached in the cold air, the metal of the joint stiff from years of strain. I remember sitting in their living room, propped up crutches, leaning against the wall. My mother brought me tea not because she wanted to, but because she felt she had to. The silence between us was suffocating. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask what had happened. Instead, she fussed over a stain on the carpet and complained about the neighbor's dog. My father read the newspaper, barely glancing in my direction. Ethan never even came by. At one point, she said with that usual flatness in her voice, "I never understood why you had to make everything so hard, Caroline." I remember staring at her words, caught somewhere between my throat and my heart. I had nearly died. I had stood in the dust, and the fire, watched men bleed out, carried bodies I would never forget. And she was worried about a stain. I left the next morning without saying goodbye. That was the last time I crossed their doorstep. And yet here I was, still playing my part, still stepping aside when they asked, still making myself small so they could be comfortable. The pilot's voice crackled overhead, announcing final boarding checks. Passengers settled. The air grew thick with that heavy stillness that comes just before takeoff. I straightened my back, pressed my hands flat against my thighs, forced myself to focus on the hum of the engines. I told myself, as I had so many times before, that none of it mattered, that I had outgrown their rejection, that I didn't care. But the truth was, it still hurt. It always hurt. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the quiet shift of something I couldn't yet name. The kind of shift that says enough. The seat was uncomfortable in a way that went beyond the physical. I shifted slightly, trying to ease the pressure on my knee, but there was no real relief. The air felt thinner back here, the kind of thinness that isn't about oxygen, but about dignity. A soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Excuse me, are you okay?" I turned. The voice belonged to the young woman in the window seat beside me, early 20s, fresh-faced, nervous. She wore a faded college sweatshirt and clutched a paperback novel in her lap, though her eyes weren't on the pages. They were on me. I offered a polite nod. "I'm fine, thank you." She hesitated, then smiled awkwardly. You looked kind of upset when you sat down." I gave a small shrug, the kind people give when they don't intend to explain. "Just a seating mix-up," I murmured. For a moment, she seemed satisfied with that. She looked back down at her book, but then her curiosity got the better of her. "Sorry," she said again, softer this time. "It's just, you seem like you've done something important. I mean, the way you carry yourself. I don't know. It's probably silly." Her words caught me off guard more than I expected. I blinked, then glanced down at my hands steady, still resting on my lap, the fingers slightly curled, the knuckles worn from decades of fieldwork. I could have told her the truth. I could have said I served for 23 years. I led missions that never made the news. I've held dying soldiers in my arms. I've buried friends. I've saved people whose names I will never know. Instead, I gave her the smallest of smiles. Nothing special, I said quietly. Just life. Her eyes lingered on me a moment longer, like she wanted to ask more. But then she nodded almost to herself and turned her gaze back to the tiny oval window beside her. We sat in silence after that. The engines began their slow, steady whine as the plane prepared for taxi. The lights dimmed slightly. I exhaled, leaning back into the seat, careful not to let my knee lock. I didn't lie because I was ashamed. I lied because I was tired. Tired of explaining. Tired of seeing people's faces shift when they heard the words veteran or combat or rank. Tired of the weight those words carried, the questions, the assumptions, the awkward silences that always followed. Sometimes it was easier to be no one. The young woman opened her book again, though I could tell she wasn't really reading. Her fingers fidgeted nervously with the corner of the page. I kept my eyes forward on the threadbare seat in front of me. Another conversation I wouldn't finish. Another connection I wouldn't make. The engines roared louder, and I stayed quiet. Row 30 wasn't just the back of the plane, it felt like another country altogether. I settled into the narrow seat, the armrests sticky from years of wear, the overhead light flickering faintly above me. The air back here carried a chill, the kind that sank into your bones and stayed there. It smelled faintly of old coffee and something chemical, disinfectant maybe, or the sterile scent of too many lives passing through. No one looked at me, no one cared. The young woman beside me in row 29 had already pulled on an eye mask. The man across the aisle tapped furiously on his phone, completely absorbed. I had become invisible again, just another face, another body in transit. I leaned my head back, the stiff cushion pressing awkwardly against my neck. The hum of the engines deepened as the cabin lights dimmed further. Shadows stretched along the worn carpet beneath my feet, and for a moment, just a breath of a moment, I wasn't sure where I was anymore. Something about this seat, this exact position, triggered a memory buried so deep, I hadn't touched it in years. The last time I was pushed out of a place I thought of as home. I must have been around 12. I don't remember what sparked the fight. It could have been anything. A forgotten chore. A poorly chosen word. With my family, it never took much. I remembered the sharpness of my mother's voice, the slam of a door, and the sound of my own feet running barefoot down the driveway. I had sat for hours on the concrete step of our neighbor's porch. No shoes, no jacket. Just me hugging my knees in the fading light, the cold of the evening settling into my skin. I remember thinking they won't come looking. I knew it, even then, and I had been right. No one came. Eventually I walked back, because where else was I going to go? I let myself in quietly, unnoticed. They hadn't even realized I was gone. Sitting here now, decades later, strapped into this uncomfortable seat, I realized that feeling never left me. That quiet understanding that some doors once closed will never open again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just absence, a hollowing out. The engines rumbled louder beneath me as the plane taxied toward the runway. I felt the vibration through the soles of my shoes, up through my legs, into my spine. I adjusted the hem of my sleeve fingers, brushing against the edge of my watch. A simple movement, but it anchored me. Something solid, something mine. I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't powerless, but still, the old weight lingered. I glanced toward the front of the cabin, though I couldn't see them, my family. Safe, settled, separate. And somewhere deep in the marrow of me, I felt the first flicker of something ancient and small but unbreakable. Not anger, not bitterness, but the quiet certainty that this would be the last time I let them make me feel less. The last time I let anyone decide my worth. The last time I would be pushed to the margins and accept it without question. I exhaled steady and slow as the plane began to move. And in the dark of row 30, I sat upright. Alone, but no longer adrift. Somewhere above the hum of the engines and the muted chatter of the cabin, a door clicked open near the front of the plane. I didn't notice it at first. I was too deep inside my own head, too used to the rhythm of being overlooked. But fate, it seems, has a strange sense of timing. I wasn't aware of it then, but at that exact moment, Michael Stenson, the pilot of this flight, stepped briefly out of the cockpit to check on final boarding procedures. He scanned the cabin as any seasoned captain would, his eyes brushing over faces without lingering, until they landed on mine. It was my name tag that caught his attention. Even from a distance, I know he saw it. The sharp embroidery, the familiar shape of the Air Force crest, the subtle way my fingers rested against the worn edge of my jacket. Old habits you never quite lose. I didn't see the recognition light up in his face, but later I'd come to understand exactly what had happened. 15 years earlier, under a punishing desert sun, Captain Michael Stenson had been one of mine. Back then, I wasn't a general. I was a major leading a team of intelligence and air support through a remote combat zone in Helmand Province. It was supposed to be routine. It never is. The convoy ahead of us hit an IED. The blast tore through vehicles, scattering debris and lives in every direction. I remember the dust first, the thick red dust, and then the screaming. Michael's vehicle had flipped, trapping him and 2 others inside as the fire took hold. The memory is sharp, bright as shattered glass. I crawled under metal, still slick with fuel, my hands raw. My knee already fractured, and I pulled him free. I pulled all 3 of them free. I never told anyone that I was scared. That every breath I took in those moments felt like it might be my last. When medevac arrived, he was barely conscious. I never expected to see him again. But the world, as I said, has a peculiar way of circling back. Up near the cockpit, something shifted. Michael Stenson's eyes stayed on me for a fraction longer than they should have. A flicker of confusion, then memory, then something quieter, something like awe. He disappeared back behind the door without a word. I sat unaware of the ripple that moment would send through the hours ahead. Unaware that the weight I had carried for so long of being invisible, of being discarded, was already beginning to unravel thread by silent thread. The plane inched forward, engines building to a low roar. I adjusted my seatbelt mechanically. My hands, steady as always, rested again on my lap. I thought of the desert, of the heat, the fear, the impossible stillness that follows survival. I thought of how sometimes we walk through life convinced that no one remembers the battles we've fought, the lives we've saved, the parts of ourselves we've left behind in places no one will ever see. And yet, sometimes, they do remember, even if it takes 15 years and a random flight for the story to circle back. The wheels bumped over the tarmac. The cabin lights flickered low. And somewhere far ahead, behind a closed cockpit door, a man who owed me his life was about to change mine forever. The engines had settled into that low, steady rumble, the sound that always reminded me of distant thunder. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to find a position that didn't pull at the old ache in my knee. I thought the girl beside me had fallen asleep. She hadn't. I felt her gaze before I saw it. When I turned my head, she was looking down, not at my face, but at my hands. At first, I didn't understand. Then I followed her eyes and saw it, the ring. It wasn't flashy. A simple gold band set with a small insignia, the Air Force crest. My fingers still bore the calluses of years in the field, and the band itself had dulled over time, but it was unmistakable to anyone who knew. She hesitated before speaking. "Excuse me, I hope this isn't too personal, but were you in the military?" I felt the weight of the question settle. The polite version would have been to deflect, to say, "I used to work in government," or something equally vague. But her voice carried no judgment, only something softer, something I recognized, curiosity edged with reverence. I nodded slightly. "I served," I said simply. She smiled, almost shy. "I thought so. My dad. He always wore a ring like that. He was Army, though. Deployed twice. He used to tell me stories when I was little." Her voice drifted for a moment, her thumb tracing the spine of the paperback still balanced on her lap. "One of his stories stuck with me," she said quietly. "When I was a kid, he told me there was this soldier, a woman. He never learned her name. Said she pulled him out after his vehicle was hit. Everyone else thought he wasn't going to make it, but she did. She saved him." Her eyes lifted to meet mine. I always wondered if she was real. Something inside me shifted. I held her gaze but didn't speak right away. My breath caught in that familiar place just behind my ribs. For a heartbeat, I was back there, kneeling in the dirt, my hands bloodied. dragging bodies one by one from the wreckage. I never remembered faces, only hands, the weight of limbs, the urgency. I cleared my throat softly. She was real, I said, my voice low. I'm sure she was. She smiled gently, not pressing further. I didn't confirm it. Didn't need to. Some truths are best left unspoken, but understood. She looked back out the window, her reflection barely visible against the darkening sky. Her fingers still fidgeted with the corner of her book, but her shoulders had relaxed. For the first time in hours, so had mine. I exhaled slow and quiet. Sometimes the world gives you a moment, a small, unexpected grace, that reminds you not everything you've done has gone unseen. That somewhere out there, the lives you've touched still carry pieces of you, even if they don't know your name. The seatbelt light chimed softly overhead, and the plane began to move. Somewhere around row 26 across the aisle from where I sat, there was a woman, older, mid-60s maybe. Hair pulled back into a neat bun, a paperback mystery novel resting on her lap. She wore a simple pearl necklace and a navy cardigan, the kind of woman you wouldn't notice at first glance, but she noticed me. I caught her eye briefly when I shifted in my seat, trying to stretch my knee without drawing attention. She didn't look away like the others. She held my gaze just long enough for me to see something, awareness perhaps, or quiet concern. I returned my focus to the window, but I could feel her eyes lingering. The hum of the engines deepened as the plane continued to taxi, and for a while, nothing happened. The world outside blurred into silver streaks. The cabin settled into that stillness that always precedes takeoff. And then, without fanfare, she reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. I wasn't watching her directly, but I saw the movement in my peripheral vision, the practiced ease of someone who wasn't scrolling for entertainment, but typing with purpose. Her fingers moved deliberately across the screen. Tap. Pause. Tap again. I shifted slightly, curiosity flickering somewhere beneath the surface. Not enough to stare. Just enough to register that something about her posture had changed. Her spine straightened, her jaw set. I didn't know it then, but I would later learn that she was writing an email to the airline's customer relations team. A formal complaint. Short to the point, but enough. I imagined the words she might have used. Passenger Caroline Brooks, visibly older, traveling alone, was asked to give up her seat under questionable circumstances to accommodate a family who showed no consideration. Passenger appeared distressed, but complied without protest. Cabin crew indifferent. Please escalate for review. She put the phone down gently on her tray table and folded her hands. She didn't look back at me. She didn't say a word, but I felt it. A small shift in the air, a ripple, because sometimes justice doesn't begin with grand gestures. Sometimes it starts quietly in the hands of strangers who refuse to look away. I exhaled softly, adjusting the sleeve of my jacket. My fingertips brushed the embroidered edge of my name patch again, and something steadied inside me. I didn't know who she was. I didn't need to. What mattered was that someone saw. I sat a little straighter, the discomfort in my knee, dull but bearable. The engines roared louder beneath us, the wheels bumping gently over the tarmac. The cabin lights flickered to their dimmed setting for takeoff. I glanced toward the front of the plane, toward the rows I could no longer reach. My family never turned around. Not once. But somewhere between those rows and the thin air beyond the cabin walls, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope, not yet, but the beginning of it. The announcement came just as the engines settled into that familiar rising pitch, seconds before we were meant to take off. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Stenson speaking. We're going to hold our position for a moment. His voice was calm, measured. But there was something beneath it, something that made me sit up straighter. I looked toward the front of the cabin, though. From row 30, I couldn't see much. A few murmurs rippled through the rows ahead. People shifted in their seats. The young woman beside me pushed up her eye mask, confused. Then the cockpit door opened. I saw him before I fully understood what was happening. Michael Stenson. His uniform was impeccable gold stripes, sharp against the deep navy of his sleeves. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes scanned the cabin with purpose. And then he saw me. I felt it, that brief, charged moment of recognition. His steps were deliberate as he moved down the aisle. Row after row, faces turned. Conversations fell into awkward silence. He stopped at my row. "Ma'am," he said gently, his voice carrying just enough to be heard without force. "Are you Caroline Brooks?" I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. He straightened. His next words weren't just for me, they were for the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said clearly, "allow me to introduce Brigadier General Caroline Brooks, United States Air Force, retired. 23 years of service, multiple combat tours, Bronze Star, Distinguished Flying Cross." The breath left my lungs. For a heartbeat, the entire cabin held still. I could feel the shift, the ripple of realization moving seat by seat, aisle by aisle. I stayed frozen, unsure whether to stand or disappear into the floor. But he wasn't finished. "She should not have been asked to move from her assigned seat," he continued, voice unwavering. "And I'd like to personally invite her to join us in seat 1A. A hushed murmur swept through the passengers. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, but for once it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like something else. Respect, shame, curiosity. My family was somewhere ahead. I didn't have to look to know they were watching. I rose slowly, steadying myself on the armrest. My knee protested, but I kept my face calm, my breath measured. The captain extended a hand, not because I needed help, but as a gesture of respect. I accepted it. As we stepped into the aisle, the air shifted around me. I could feel it, the way the narrative changed in an instant. Not the black sheep, not the burden, not anymore. I walked forward past the rows that had once felt impossible to reach. The murmurs faded behind me. The weight I'd carried for so long felt lighter. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just kept walking. Some battles you fight without ever lifting a weapon, and sometimes you win. The silence that followed felt heavier than the air itself. I could feel it, the weight of their stares. The passengers who had ignored me minutes ago now watched every step I took. Some shifted uncomfortably, others looked down ashamed, but most just stared wide-eyed, as if seeing me for the first time. I didn't need to search for them. I knew exactly where they were, row 8. My family. Even without turning my head, I could sense the stillness in their seats. I knew that stillness too well. It was the same cold detachment I'd lived with for years now, mirrored back at them in the most public way imaginable. For a brief second as I passed, I allowed myself a glance. My mother's face was frozen, her lips parted in disbelief. My father sat stiff, hands clasped too tightly on his lap, his eyes distant, as if refusing to process what was happening. And Ethan, my brother, the one who had always been the chosen son, he looked pale, smaller somehow. His mouth moved slightly, but no sound came out. I kept walking. The captain's voice sounded again, calm but firm, echoing through the cabin. "In my 23 years of service," he said, "I've learned one thing that holds true in any uniform. We don't leave our own behind. Not in combat, not in life, not ever." His words rang louder than any applause could have. I heard someone in row 5 whisper, "She's a general." Another voice, softer, said, "I think I've seen her on the news before." The murmur of voices grew, but no one raised them. It was the kind of stunned silence that left people unsure whether to clap or lower their eyes. I felt none of it on the surface. Inside, though, I could feel the slow, deliberate untangling of something old, something buried. For years I had let them tell me who I was, the outsider, the failure, the disappointment they didn't want to claim. And I had accepted it silently, obediently, because a part of me believed it too. Not anymore. When I reached the front of the plane, the captain stepped aside, motioning to the first-class seat 1A. I hesitated for just a moment, not out of doubt, but because I wanted to remember this, to etch it into the walls of my memory for every time I had ever felt small. I sat down. The leather was soft beneath me, the space generous, but more than comfort, it felt right. As the captain returned to the intercom, he added one last line. His voice softened, but it carried through every corner of the cabin. "Dignity," he said, "is not something we give. It's something we recognize." And just like that, the plane began to move. But the ground beneath me, the ground I'd walked on my entire life, had already shifted. I sat quietly in seat 1A, my hands resting on my lap, the weight of the moment still sinking in. The cabin had settled into a strange stillness. The murmurs had faded, replaced by the soft rustle of seatbelts and the muted ding of overhead signals. I kept my eyes forward. I wasn't expecting anything more. Honestly, I was still adjusting to what had already happened. But then, from somewhere behind me, a voice broke the silence. "Excuse me. General Brooks," I turned slightly. A man mid-50s, graying at the temples, stood hesitantly in the aisle, one hand resting on the seat back for balance. He wore a simple navy jacket and jeans, nothing remarkable. His voice trembled slightly when he spoke. "I'm sorry," he stammered. I didn't want to interrupt, but I recognized the name when the captain said it. I gave him a small nod, polite but cautious. "Yes." He swallowed hard, his throat working like he was trying to push down words too heavy to carry. "My son," he began, voice cracking at the edges. "Corporal Nathan Reese, Afghanistan, 2009. The air left my lungs before I could stop it. I remembered. It wasn't his face I recalled, it was the hands. The frantic, bloodied hands reaching through smoke, the screams tearing through the desert air. His son's convoy had been hit ambush from two sides. I'd been leading aerial overwatch, but when the call came through, I made the decision myself to go in on foot when extraction faltered. I pulled 3 men out that day. One of them had been barely alive. I remembered pressing my hand against the bleeding wound, screaming for a medic, refusing to let him slip away. The man in front of me, this father, his eyes were glassy now. "He made it home because of you," he whispered. "He's married now, 2 kids. He teaches high school science in Boise." He paused, his fingers tightening on the seat back. I never got to say thank you. The breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure what to say. The words I'd learned to use, professional, distant, none of them felt right. Instead, I simply nodded. Slowly, carefully. "I'm glad," I said softly. "I'm so very glad he made it home." The man smiled, a broken, grateful kind of smile, and pressed his hand to his chest briefly before stepping back into his row. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. But in that instant, something shifted again. This wasn't about my family anymore. It wasn't about their coldness, their silence, their absence. It was about something larger, something untouchable by the smallness of their rejection. I sat back in the seat, the hum of the engine steady beneath me, and felt it quiet, unfamiliar, but undeniable. I mattered. Not because of medals or rank, not because of titles, but because somewhere, somehow, I had made a difference in the life of someone who still remembered, who still cared. The plane tilted slightly as it made its slow turn onto the runway, and for the first time in what felt like years, I allowed myself to breathe fully. I wasn't invisible after all. The plane had leveled off, the seatbelt sign glowing softly above me. The cabin settled into a muted hum of quiet conversation, the occasional clink of drink carts rolling down the aisle. I kept my eyes on the small window beside me, the vast stretch of clouds glowing under the morning sun. I thought that would be the end of it, but nothing stays buried forever. I heard his voice before I saw him. "Caroline," I turned my head slowly, deliberately. Ethan stood just beyond the curtain separating first class from coach. His hands were awkwardly shoved into his pockets, his expression tight, with something that looked like discomfort or guilt. Maybe both. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how it got to this. The seat, the way Mom and Dad handled it. I didn't agree with any of it. I studied him, this man who had once been the golden child, the brother who had always taken more space, more light, more of everything. He looked smaller now, though his frame hadn't changed. I didn't rush to fill the silence. After a moment, I said quietly, "Some wounds don't heal just because someone says sorry, Ethan." His face shifted, something fragile cracking beneath the surface. He nodded once slowly, eyes dropping to the carpet beneath his shoes. "I know," he murmured. "I know." He hesitated, as if there was more he wanted to say, as if there were years of things unsaid piling up behind his teeth. But instead he stepped back. He didn't force it. He didn't defend himself. He just gave me a small, pained smile, the kind you give when you realize too late that some damage can't be undone. As he turned to leave, I caught sight of her. My mother. She stood just inside the partition, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her expression was guarded but not angry, just unreadable. For a moment her eyes met mine, and in that single stretched breath, I saw something I hadn't seen in her in decades. Not warmth, not love, but recognition. For the first time, I think she saw me, not as the daughter she never understood, not as the disappointment she carried like a burden, but as a person, a woman, a survivor. She opened her mouth slightly as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she exhaled softly through her nose, her gaze never breaking. I held it, calm, steady. I didn't offer a nod. I didn't reach for her. Some distances can't be crossed with a single step. And then, almost imperceptibly, she lowered her arms. Her shoulders dropped, her chin dipped. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was something, a shift. A quiet surrender to the truth that had hung between us for years. I turned back toward the window as they disappeared behind the curtain. My heart felt steady, no spike of adrenaline, no hollow ache. Just stillness. Some battles aren't meant to be won. Some wars end not with declarations, but with silence. I breathed in long and deep, the clouds stretching endlessly beyond the glass. And for the first time in my life, I no longer needed their approval to feel whole. The plane settled into its cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dimming as the cabin shifted back to the quiet rhythms of a long flight. But the silence wasn't whole. It was fractured, buzzing with the undercurrent of what had just happened. I could feel it. Even without turning around, I could sense the whispers, the glances, the quiet rustle of conversations starting and stopping, hushed too late to hide. Not everyone approved. It started small, 2 passengers in row 5, murmuring too loudly for their own discretion. I mean, I get that she's military, one said, her voice sharp with thinly veiled irritation. But stopping an entire flight for one person, that feels excessive. Her seatmate, a man with a deep voice, answered back lower. You don't humiliate someone like that, he muttered. She didn't ask for it. The first woman huffed softly. People bend over backwards for soldiers these days. It's political correctness, that's all. I didn't react. I kept my eyes on the horizon outside the window, the soft blur of clouds beneath us. But the words landed anyway, the way sharp things always do. A few rows back, another voice rose this time, clearer, more defensive. A younger man, maybe mid-20s, leaning across the aisle to whisper to his companion. My uncle served. He said sometimes the hardest battles are the ones no one sees. She deserves that seat. She deserves respect. I exhaled slowly, my hands resting palm down on the armrests. The voices swirled in the cabin, fragments of approval, resentment, confusion. And then, one sentence. Quiet. Almost inaudible, but I heard it. A man's voice, low and deliberate, general or not. She's still just a woman nobody wanted. The words sliced through the air like a blade. I didn't flinch, not outwardly. I stayed still, spine straight, breath steady. But something inside me shifted. Not the old wound that one had scarred over long ago, but something deeper. Because that's the truth no ceremony can erase. No title, no salute. You can rise, you can survive. You can wear medals across your chest, and still there will be people who see nothing but absence. Nothing but the sum of what you lack. A daughter unloved, a sister unwanted, a woman discarded. That's the part no uniform can shield you from. I let the words settle. I didn't turn around. I didn't let them see even a flicker of reaction, because I knew better than anyone that dignity isn't handed to you by the approval of others. It's something you claim quietly over years in moments like this, when you choose not to fall, when you choose not to shrink. The plane hummed softly around me. The cart rolled by with quiet clinks of glass. A flight attendant passed, her eyes flicking toward me for a brief second, her expression unreadable. I breathed in deep and slow. Some people will always choose to see the cracks instead of the strength. That's their burden, not mine. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, the soft vibration of flight beneath my feet. And when I opened them again, the sky stretched wide, endless and untouched. I stayed still. Because sometimes staying still is its own kind of defiance. The hum of the engines soothed me, but my mind refused to rest. I sat in 1A, staring out into the endless stretch of clouds, the quiet of the cabin folding around me. And somewhere in that stillness, something old, something I had buried deep, rose unbidden to the surface. It wasn't just about the seat. It was never just about the seat. The memory came softly at first. Disconnected images. My father's study dark-paneled walls, the heavy scent of tobacco, the soft shuffle of papers, the way he always kept the door ajar, just enough for voices to drift into the hallway. I was barely 24 when it happened. Young enough to believe in right and wrong. Young enough to think doing the right thing could actually heal what was broken between us. I hadn't meant to overhear. I hadn't meant to know. But once I heard him, his voice low, sharp, calculating, there was no one hearing it. The falsified bids, the cooked numbers, the quiet deals behind closed doors that kept his business afloat long after it should have collapsed. He wasn't the man I thought he was, and in that instant I became something else too. Not his daughter. Not the soldier in uniform who made him proud when the neighbors asked. But a threat. I reported it. Not because I wanted to destroy him. Not because I hated him. But because I was bound by oath, by honor, by everything the Air Force had taught me to tell the truth. The fallout was quiet. No public scandal. No headlines. Just quiet ruin. Contracts revoked. Partnerships severed. And with it the last shred of respect my family had for me. They never spoke of it openly. They didn't need to. The distance grew overnight, calcified into every phone call, not returned, every holiday invitation that never came. And the unspoken message was clear: I had chosen strangers over blood. I carried that weight for 20 years. But the part that no one saw, the part no one ever knew, was that I could have destroyed him completely. I could have let the full investigation run its course, could have leaked the evidence to the press, could have stripped away every last pretense of dignity he clung to. But I didn't. I kept the quiet parts quiet. I let the story fade into nothing. I let his reputation survive in the brittle, polished way small towns allow their secrets to fade. And still, they turned their backs. I wasn't cast out because I failed them. I was cast out because I refused to help them lie. The realization settled over me now, not as a fresh wound, but as an old scar I finally dared to trace with open eyes. The rejection I'd carried, the coldness I'd swallowed, the years of silence. None of it was really about who I was. It was about who they were. People so desperate to protect the illusion of their own perfection that they were willing to discard anyone who held up a mirror they didn't want to face. And I foolishly perhaps had let them do it. Not out of weakness, but out of love twisted into something unrecognizable. The kind of love that makes you believe silence is loyalty. That makes you believe protecting someone's name matters more than protecting yourself. I closed my eyes, letting the breath move through me slowly, evenly. The betrayal didn't hurt because they had rejected me. It hurt because I had chosen to carry the weight of their secrets, so they wouldn't have to. I had let myself become the scapegoat, the outcast, the shadow they could blame over and over because it was easier than admitting their own darkness. And the tragedy was, I did it willingly. I opened my eyes again, the light from the clouds soft against the glass. I didn't regret telling the truth. I never had. But I regretted the years I spent hoping they would understand. I knew better now. Some people choose blindness. Some people choose silence. And no matter how deeply you wish it, otherwise you can't make them see you. You can't make them love you, but you can choose yourself. The seat beneath me softened as I exhaled the tightness in my chest, loosening just slightly. I wasn't the one who needed forgiveness, and I wasn't the one who had failed. The wheels touched down with a soft bump, the familiar lurch of arrival settling into my bones. The cabin stirred to life, seatbelts clicked open overhead bins, creaked voices rose in that quiet, eager energy of people ready to move on. I stayed seated. For once there was no rush, no urgency, just the steady calm of knowing that whatever had been broken, I no longer needed to fix it. As I gathered my bag and stepped off the plane, the brightness of the terminal lights caught me off guard. For a moment, everything felt surreal, like stepping into a world that somehow moved forward without you. That's when I saw them. A small group of young cadets, barely more than teenagers, stood near the gate, waiting for a connecting flight. Their uniforms crisped, their backs straight. They laughed softly among themselves, sharing stories I could only imagine. One of them, barely 19 by the look of her, caught sight of me first. Her eyes dropped instinctively to the insignia on my duffel, then up to my face. Her expression shifted: recognition, respect, maybe something more. Before I could react, she nudged the others. In quiet unison, they straightened. Every single one of them offered a subtle nod, not a formal salute. Not something rehearsed, but the kind of unspoken acknowledgement that only those who wear the uniform understand. I didn't know their names. They didn't know mine. And yet in that fleeting moment, something passed between us. A thread pulled tight across generations. A reminder that no matter how the world outside chose to define me here, in this there was still belonging. I offered them a small nod in return, my eyes softening without effort. The weight I'd carried for so long felt lighter, not because the past had changed, but because I had. I kept walking, not away, not toward, just forward. A week later, the letter arrived. I found it resting neatly on my doorstep when I returned from a long walk. One of those slow, aimless walks you take when your mind is too full to sit still. The envelope was heavy official. The Department of Defense seal pressed deep into the paper. I opened it carefully, sitting alone on the front porch, the soft gold of the afternoon sun painting long shadows across the wooden floorboards. The words were simple, formal, but they carried the weight of something I hadn't expected: a promotion post-retirement recognizing service that had long gone unacknowledged. Brigadier General Tuang Truk, honorary. I read it twice, then again. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I simply sat there, the paper soft between my fingers, the breeze brushing gently against my face. In the distance, children's laughter floated up from a neighbor's yard. Somewhere a wind chime sang, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I let myself be still. I thought of my father, of my mother, of Ethan, of the years I had lost waiting for an apology that would never come, craving acceptance from people who had none to give. And then I thought of the cadets, of Captain Stenson, of the man whose son had lived. I thought of all the quiet, unspoken ways a life could leave ripples in the world. I sat back, closing my eyes briefly. I wasn't carrying the pain anymore, not because they had changed, but because I had learned at last to forgive even those who never deserved it. Not for them, for me. The wind shifted slightly, brushing loose strands of hair across my face. The world felt open again, quiet, kind. I let the peace settle. I stayed there until the sun dipped low, the letter folded neatly on my lap. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning, with sunlight streaming through your window and the comfort of a warm cup of coffee? Or maybe it's a late night, one of those nights where stories like this find you when you need them most. Let me know in the comments. We read every single one with care and gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to this channel. Not just to hear more stories like mine, but to become part of something bigger, a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are, whoever you are, I hope you carry this story with you, and I hope you remember. Sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly, patiently, until you're ready to open your heart and let it in. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.